welcome to Game Dev London. I'm Chris Payne, and today we're going to be talking about managing player expectations with video games, particularly in respect of the reception of Baldur's Gate 3. So with me, I have co-hosts Gianluca and Oscar. Gianluca, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. I am Game Dev London's marketing manager, Gianluca. I also work for a studio called Beta Jester, and I've co-founded a studio recently, and I'm also a game design student part-time as well, so I'm busy bee, and I do a bit of game design, bit of programming, bit of marketing here and there.
Cool, and Oscar?
So obviously I'm old. I've been doing games for a very long time, and I'm a host. I run a living game publisher called Fundamental Games. We publish as Jetpack Collective. And when I'm not doing that, I'm on a pod quest to learn everything you want to know about game dev but never dared to ask here on Game Dev London.
And where are you right now?
So I'm literally at Gamescom. Well, it's the 2 days before Gamescom. DevCon is going across the road from me. I'm in the Dorrant Hotel. That's just opposite the main complex. And you may occasionally find me waving at people during the middle of this recording because I literally have the great and the good walking past. I was very delighted. Like a few seconds ago, I was having to wave to four members of Jagex who's just walking past. So and that's just one of many people who are in this particular lobby right now.
Brilliant. Okay, I'm Chris Payne. I run Quantum Soup Studios, and I've worked in the industry for 25 years or so. And what I thought we would talk about today was the Baldur's Gate 3 controversy, or at least it's not really Baldur's Gate 3 that is controversial. Baldur's Gate 3, by all accounts, is extremely good. I have not yet had the pleasure of playing it, but Oscar, you have, haven't you?
Yeah, I'm about 90 hours in. I am completely obsessed by it. And I recommend anyone who's got a Steam Deck, that is just fantastic to play on. And I'm actually doing the ridiculous thing where I could easily have a PC to play with. But no, I put my Steam Deck under my TV. I use that when I'm at home, and I use it on the train when I'm on the train or on the plane, like I was on the flight over here. So I am playing it at any moment I physically can.
Brilliant. So, is would you say that Baldur's Gate 3 is as good as all the reviews make it out to be?
It's hard to say that sometimes because as somebody who is, spends all the time living and thinking about game design, I want to be critical about everything, and it's not a perfect game, but it is a freaking amazing game. They happen, again, as someone who's been playing D&D since he was 10 years old. I'm talking about 1979 when it first came to the UK. This is a game which is completely, authentic as far as you could do. But yes, there are some annoying little moments. Like I can never, even though I'm an assassin now, I can't actually assassinate anybody because the moment I attack, I've lost the initiative. It's like what? But it's appropriate. They're making a amazing Baldur's Gate computer game that is as true to the rules of D&D as you could hope to, and still make it playable.
Right. Okay. So Gianluca, the online controversy started with a tweet from Zalavia Nelson, who is a lovely guy. I've met him once, I think, and this was a kind of a well-meaning tweet, but it seems to have been taken the wrong way by gamers.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best way to put it. The tweet itself, I feel like, has somewhat been misconstrued, maybe, or through the thread of tweets, through like a series of different interpretations that have now led it to maybe become a wider comment than I think the initial statement might have been. This is my interpretation. Obviously, I can't speak for Zalavia. I'm not Zalavia. But ultimately, I feel like the core points of the thread were just that Larian, like the developers of Baldur's Gate 3, had a certain capacity and a certain amount of resources that isn't available to. It had a unique game development cycle, basically, and that's not available to every studio. It's not available to every AAA studio, and so it's important to view what they've produced with a measure of a pinch of salt, basically, to be able to say, how possible is this, of producing a mega game of this scale, that's been, been 6 years in the making, had 3 years of early access, that's allowed it to continue to be funded, with a team of specialists that have made several games in this genre that have been hyper successful already and have the experience and resources to do that. What is the capacity for other studios to have all of those materials come together and still produce something amazing? And I think the core point is that that's not super possible for a lot of people, a lot of studios. And in that case, gamers should be willing to understand that not every RPG that comes out is going to be like this and at this level. Where I think the confusion might have arisen is, I think some view this as Zalavia's view as a protection of predatory practices across AAA, or practices they don't like across AAA, whether that is, releasing with, loads of issues, bugs, etc. before the game's ready, releasing with DLC already built in instead of just including it, and a multitude of other issues, when I'm not sure that's what Zalavia was saying, really, and that it wasn't about you need to. I think I have a quote from a video that was the idea. This tweet, or this thread of tweets, was saying game development is hard. You don't get it. Be quiet. And I don't think that was the point at all. I think the point was really, yes, game development is hard, but it's also super expensive. It's massively high risk when you're making a game of this size, and so you can't expect every game to be this size. Not that AAA is perfect and you shouldn't comment on the things you don't like about it. I don't think anyone would agree with that.
Yeah. It is unfortunate that I've seen a lot of responses, primarily on YouTube, to Zalavia's perspective, which took a variety of positions, varying from kind of like lazy devs just make a good game like Larian did, to kind of like, as you say, like this is supporting microtransactions and like various other anything else that we don't like. So,
people say they don't like, and yet they go and do. And what they actually don't like is people doing it inappropriately and inauthentically. What they actually don't like is when they make a horrible job of it. But maybe I'm biased.
I think there's potentially sort of like split in the market between people who are willing to pay for microtransactions and enjoy that sort of a game. And
that's not what this podcast is for, but I could absolutely go to town on that conversation, because the Battlefield Online argument, where we had exactly that happen, like 2011, very people who were complaining, the very people who spent the most money on them.
Right.
And it's about how they're managed, not about the thing. The trouble is, we're so caught up in the hype cycle about saying how that's terrible and evil, because a number of, more than a few, but a number of people were really bad actors in that. And that has soured it for everybody. So we end up with a whole bunch of problems that are overhyped as negative, even further than they were already bad, and they were bad. And now we're in a situation where even making a game good can be problematic.
So the trick is, I guess, without obviously the point of this conversation is not to just form a wall with Zalavia and dunk on all the gamers who don't get game development. How do we communicate better with the audience? Because at the end of the day, everything we make as game developers is for different segments of the gaming audience, and we want everything that we make to be well received. We want people to like it. We want maybe people who are like not interested in that particular genre to like maybe get into it as well. What can we do to improve our communication with our audience about some of like these the difficulties of like why every game can't be Baldur's Gate 3?
Well, I mean, I think the reason I want to step back on this a little bit is because at the end of the day, I don't think players actually expect every game to be a Baldur's Gate 3. I think there's kind of hype cycle, absolutely unsteady. If you have an RPG game, this is now a fantastic example of what happens if a team has the resources to do something that is a complete experience. And the only companies that really, as I say, the only companies that can do that are the ones who already have track record, the capacity, the toolkit, the framework, the experience, the publishing resources, the financial resources. And that only happens after decades of preparation. Mm-hmm. And, if you look at Baldur's Gate 3, it's a 3, for goodness sake. And there's so many references back to the first few. Okay, it's not even a 3, if you think about it. How many extensions, and then there's Neverwinter Nights. I know it's not quite the same, but there's such a vast array of material, not just in the computer game, but in the whole Sword Coast mythology experiences. And I think, like you said, the power that D&D has particularly gained post, the pandemic experience, with the Critical Roles, with the Dimension 20s, with the various other experiences out there, with people that maybe you didn't understand D&D like some of us, have suddenly realised what a powerful opportunities for kind of storytelling with your friends is playful, and that's magical. But that's not what games are, right? It's not the definition of what a game is. A game does need to have a promise that's delivered. And I think when you have games where, actually, even that's not even true. You need a promise that feels satisfying. You want to be left wanting more.
Yeah.
That's the challenge here. And when you see games where they haven't lived up to their promise, where you see games where the studio had to make difficult decisions, and even some of these amazing AAA games, I sit there and I'm hugely frustrated. My classic joke I make is about Last of Us, which is both one of the best games you've ever seen, but at the same time, it's so full of what I call designer bullshit, because I'm sitting there, and if I stealth kill people, I get no ammo. If I shoot them, I get loads of ammo. What the heck is that about? Loads is an exaggeration. But my point is, designers play tricks on us intentionally in order to be able to create a world that feels bigger than it is. And in the case of Baldur's Gate, it happens to also be enormous. For other games, we try our best to make the game as satisfying as possible with very literally magic tricks where we're setting the scene, we're setting your expectation, and you're filling the rest of the game with your imagination. When we do that right, players are satisfied, even if it's a Tetris-like thing. But when we do that badly, where we try and reach too far, and it's obvious we haven't satisfied that urge, then actually, to be honest, we're fair to be lambasted.
Yeah, I feel like, sorry to jump in there. I feel like the point you're making is addresses the challenge of why do players, including us as players, feel this way about certain facets of the industry. Like, clearly this controversy or this discussion is founded around a dissatisfaction with AAA in particular, but a lot in general other facets of the industry. And I feel like what you were saying was an answer to that, in like, it's about failing to deliver what's promised. And I agree with that. I think that the question that Chris, you initially asked about how do we bridge the gap in communication, because I feel like fundamentally that's what's been lost in this discussion, is that there's a miscommunication in that at some point somebody decided that saying that you can't expect every studio to make a game of this size and deliver it with the promise that is intended. Is somebody equated that with, you think that predatory practices are fine in games, and that's clearly not the same thing.
No,
And there's been a miscommunication there, obviously. And I feel like that's what the question that you initially asked was, Chris. Sometimes.
But more than that, some of those predatory practices are essentially. My problem I had is you've got people accusing predatory practices where they don't exist, and there are bad implementations that look like predatory practices. Not saying there aren't predatory practices at all, but a lot of what's called predatory is sometimes just a different business model. And understanding the failure for the game studio to communicate their proposition, their value, the failure to focus on delivering things that players care about is the heart there. But someone throwing out the word predatory practices, I think it's just misunderstanding. No, you're not. I'm just saying the market. Sorry, Chris, I interrupted there. The passion that can come in.
That's cool. So, I mean, it's an interesting one because clearly there are a whole bunch of different sectors of the market. There are people who will wait all year to buy the latest Call of Duty and play that all year until the next Call of Duty comes out. Then there are other people who will sort of hoover up all of these delightful little indie games that are only a few hours to play, and they're very happy with that. So different players have different tastes, obviously, but I think to a certain extent it depends. You can still have an indie game that feels too small because perhaps it has overpromised, or a AAA game that doesn't deliver in the same way. So I guess it's very much about managing those expectations so that players know whether they are going to get a vast, expansive Baldur's Gate 3 style experience, or whether they are signing up for something that's a little bit smaller and more intimate, that they can expect to be over in 5 or 6 hours. So those things do already exist. Why is it that how have Zalavia's comments been taken so been reacted to so aggressively by a certain sector? Is what I'm wondering.
I'm not entirely sure, and I think it's because, we are talking about a platform that has had a certain amount of change, shall we say, that has a habit of, there is a reality that if you have an opinion that is one that's going to cause opposition, you're going to get seen. And I don't want to dismiss the frustration that people have had, and I think there is a genuine layer of frustration because of a series of games which have maybe not come out to the level expected. I get that. But then look at a game like, Last of Us. Not Last of Us, sorry, No Man's Sky. I meant to say No Man's. I got Last of Us in my brain because I said it earlier. No Man's Sky. Look at No Man's Sky, right? Oh, that coming out, that got slammed for not being good enough. And then they worked at it, and now they've got an amazing community of people who really fall in love with it. But they got slammed really hard. Fallout 76 was terrible at launch, absolutely awful. And it's one of my favourite games now because they fixed most of it. And again, the community who were really into it are really into it. Did they burn players? Yes. Do you still hear people telling you it's terrible? Yes. Are those people playing the game? No. Well, why would they be? So I think there's a definite kind of maybe a bit of perspective, a bit of nuance. At the end of the day, there's a lot of people who will hold up amazing content rightfully on a pedestal. And that's normal human behavior. But actually, if you think about the reality of what it took to make that, if you think about the reality of what effort other people are also doing, which is equally valid, but maybe at a different scale. But then we're caught in this ambition gap. It's actually one of the things that whenever I'm doing kind of accelerator programs or lecturing, mentoring, that kind of stuff, I'm always telling people to try and just do one thing. Don't try to make your opus magnus. too many designers want to be the kind of auteur. They want to make their one-time project. They want to make that the first thing they do. You can't. You've got to build up to it. You've got to, there are very few investors out there who will turn around and give you the complete free rein. And even if you had it, more times than not, you'll screw it up. It's called the difficult second album problem in music. It's like, once you've had the success, to be able to get the credit, the investment, to be able to have the trust to make it, you then lose the very thing that made the first game so special, that constraint.
Yeah.
And I think that we forget constraint too easily.
Yeah, I mean, constraint is on game design is a fascinating thing. I mean, the biggest constraint that we generally have as game developers is time. Because at some point you've got to finish the game and get it ready for market, and there is every game. I guarantee you that there's a whole bunch of stuff that was supposed to go into Baldur's Gate 3 that hit the cutting room floor because it wasn't quite ready in time. And in some ways, I imagine they did okay because there's so much stuff in Baldur's Gate 3 that it was arguably relatively easy to say sort of like, oh well, we can just cut stuff that isn't up to scratch yet.
Probably necessary.
But that's an issue even at a very small scale for indie developers who are making something much smaller and still have to maybe cut stuff that they would have liked to put in. But at the indie scale, then the stuff that you're cutting is not going to be kind of like more side quest content. It's likely to be kind of things that some gamers would consider core features because they've seen it in so many other games.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry. I was going to say, I feel like this all drills back down to managing expectation, right? And it's clear, and when you pick up an indie title of varying size, there's already an established expectation for what you might get, and I think that's part. And also, you're paying less, most likely. So there's an element of, I guess, there's clearly less animosity towards that side of the industry, in comparison to AAA, where expectations are always through the roof and at their highest, and that's where most of the animosity is held. Or I agree that it's definitely not a black and white issue, and it's a grey area in every way, in terms of like whether that animosity is valid or not, in what ways and to what extent. I think obviously it's somewhat, and everyone will have a different stance on the details. But really, I think it's about being I totally agree with what you said, Oscar, which is that it's about being transparent on what you're making and what you're trying to make, and then sticking by that and trying to deliver that to the best of your abilities. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that isn't necessarily done a huge amount is transparency on what you kind of allude to it in terms of you're saying a lot of the things people don't like is just different business models. And I think that often AAA titles are released, and people are upset because once they pay some money, they have to pay some more to get more. Yeah. And I think that which I don't have a problem with, like existing. I think it's more a matter of if they make it clear that's what's going to happen, then players would probably be less upset about it when they were confronted with it. Would that impact sales? That's a whole new problem. But I guess that's the kind of my thought process on it. I feel like you're about to speak, so please.
No, you kind of nailed it there. I mean, I have a problem with charging a full price up front and then continuing to charge full price for ongoing material. I think pick a lane is an important thing. I have a problem with the DLC model. Look, there are certain games I'm very happy because the promise is met. I don't have an issue if it's, like you say, it's been described, this is why, this is what you're going to get. And if it's my expectation of the quality is sufficiently high to get me over that price barrier, fantastic. But oddly, that's what I find so almost like frustratingly hilarious is if you really care about the game and you want to be able to keep on playing it and you want to have all those things that were left on the cutting room floor because we have to get it all packaged up and released on a particular release date, then actually the games with the ongoing revenue model, I mean, it doesn't have to be microtransactions, but those ongoing models, if they are done well and you create a genuine living experience, namely you've got constant, small but consistent, predictable improvements to player quality of experience, then actually that live ops free-to-play model is actually what you really need. Now, it's unpopular at the moment because we've had people fake it by saying, here's the game, I'm going to give you DLC in 6 months, and yeah, that's live ops. No, it isn't. Just because you've got a server running, it's about maintaining and managing it authentically and ethically the community. But not every game is the same. Not every game has to be in that same model. You wouldn't use, that model for, a standalone storytelling experience. Although I think you could probably redesign a game like Baldur's Gate. It would not be Baldur's Gate. It would be a different game. You could take a game design like that where you build the world and then you build the events on the world. And then you could have continuous adventures in that world that you love, but it wouldn't be the same experience exactly.
Yeah. I mean, that would, as you say, that would be a different pitch to the player. And that would presumably require like an ongoing release cadence of content, because you wouldn't be able to ship it with all of the content available from day one.
But you wouldn't need to. And actually, the joy of that model is that you don't want to. And if it's done right, you're talking about having a lot of that content as configuration and writing. And you're reusing a lot of the existing material. So you get much more value out of the whole thing that already exists that you care about and you want to learn out.
Yeah.
I think this is the argument is like you can write a game as a film, or you can write a game as a TV show. Why aren't we writing games as soap operas? Honestly, why not?
Yeah.
I mean, the soap opera narrative model is really interesting, and it goes for decades.
Yeah. There's a series of overlapping story arcs involving different characters who come into the mix and then go
what
away.
World would that work with? Baldur's Gate would kind of fit, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I feel like the closest example you have to that, like story-driven, or one of the immediate example that popped to mind is probably not the closest, is MMOs basically, but where it's like you have a world, it has a foundational story, and then there's a new content release that adds more story ultimately. And yeah, that's kind of what immediately made me think of when you said that.
And it is a classic example. And a lot of my thinking comes out of going through that cycle since like Meridian 59. If anyone's old enough to remember Meridian 59, yeah, I was there too. But actually, I go back so far. I played a game called Shame in 1984, an online text-based multiplayer dungeon. I'm that old. But I will do one thing. Sorry, I'm hogging things. I do apologize. Just one example of a not D&D. It was Vampire the Masquerade. Yeah. But what was really interesting about the Vampire Masquerade that was originally pitched back in the 90s was they built in the mechanics so that you could actually run the games as a dungeon master with your friends. I actually had the whole UK Camarilla, so the Vampire the Masquerade social community, all in a room with the original publishers, pitching that we would run it as a live role-playing game. And the publishers at the time didn't want to know because they didn't think there was anything in role-playing games.
Well, alas.
Yeah, I think history has proven that there's definitely mileage in that particular genre. I did want to pick up on a point that you made, though, that I think one of the issues that to a certain extent hamstrings particularly the AAA industry is that games nowadays are vastly more expensive to make than they were even 10 years ago. But prices have not changed significantly. Well, the amount... they have the end price has changed in the sense that like you end up paying more money because the publishers are trying to extract enough money to cover the cost of making the damn game from an audience who are still clinging to sort of like wanting to pay £50 for a game. Now, even though the market has also grown significantly in the last 10 years, there's I don't know.
Yeah,
I think
I feel.
Go on, Gianluca.
I was going to say, I feel like this is like being echoed in other entertainment industries as well, like film, right? The blockbuster films cost millions. Like the biggest films cost millions and make loads and loads of profit, but studios can't afford to make they can't afford for them to flop, basically. And I feel like games have now reached that threshold at a AAA level, like these huge titles. Yeah, and I think that this was. I mean, if you look at Baldur's Gate, that thread that we started talking about, I think in there, Zalavia mentions 400 devs over 6 years, not including outsourcers.
Yeah.
With a 3-year early access that allowed them to gain some more revenue to fund that extra period to really fine tune it and make it better. And from a personal perspective, I have a friend who bought Baldur's Gate 3 in early access like a couple of years ago and was like, yeah, this is a buggy mess, but I love it and I think it's going to be great. And 2 years later, absolutely correct. But if that game hadn't had the capacity to do that and to make those fine-tuned changes, then it wouldn't have been what we're all talking about now, right? That it's so exceptional. So it really paints a picture of the fact that the restrictions, financial restrictions, that come with making a game of this size, of this quality, with this level of polish, with this number of people, is not possible for a lot of people, most.
But there are some things we can take from it that anyone can do and anyone should do, and that is getting that game in front of real players as early as possible gets you real feedback.
Yeah.
And as much as we've done, I remember certainly we had an internal kind of qualitative testing, so we'd actually have people in the room, we would sit there and we would work through with them, see how they would play the game. We'd have third parties who were not us in the team who would be managing that process, and we'd get some real deep insight in what's going on. That still meant nothing. Well, not nothing. It wasn't really relevant. What's relevant is when you get real people putting down their cold hard cash and trusting you. But if you're going to do that, you've got to give so much value to those people and appreciation to those people, because what they're doing by putting up with your dodgy bugs and your dodgy storylines and all that kind of stuff is they are helping you make that game better. But we also need players to understand that's what we're doing. When we do early access, if you see an early access that's being done authentically by a team that's really trying, you may see no change happening in that game. But there is a ton going on in terms of the back end, the server, the infrastructure, the art, the polish, even just setting up the mechanics to be able to sell something for that game. All of those things are profoundly difficult. So there is a bit of a give and take. We need to get our games in front of players, but we also need players to trust us a bit, even if it seems to take a while for us to get it right. That's a tough call to make.
Yeah, that's an excellent conclusion to end on, I think, Oscar. Gianluca, do you have anything to add?
No, I think we've rounded it off nicely there, which is that there's stuff that game devs can improve on and try to do, and equally players can help with doing that. So we can all work together to make better games.
Yay!
I'm pretty sure that's something that we can all agree.
That's the goal.
And we can go off in the sunset with the flowers in the garden, and it's all going to be fine.
Okay. Thank you so much, Gianluca and Oscar.
Thank you very much.
I've been Chris Payne. We are Game Dev London. Pop along to gamedevlondon.net to find links to our Discord and the rest of our podcasts on the podcast app of your choice or YouTube. And we will see you next week. GameDev.London, sorry. I was doing so well. See you next week.